Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet, and joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School, Long Island. It's great to see you. I feel like it's been a while. But we're done with Pesach. Yesterday was Yom HaShoah. We are in these days, these very, very special days in Israel. We'll talk about that, I hope, towards the end of our conversation. But this week is a double parsha. Tazria Metzora writes, smack in the center of the book of Vayikra, Leviticus. Let's just say, I'll say this nicely, okay, which is, if there are parshas that you want to kind of gloss over, or maybe even press the delete button on, or the difficult parshas to talk about, this would be the parsha, the two parshas that are most difficult to talk, especially if you have like a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah on this weekend. What do you choose? And so, and here, of course, I want to say every parsha is amazing, and this is an amazing parsha. But I'm going to turn to you and ask you to make the case for something interesting or something that's compelling about this parsha. That say, okay, I'm not in a Tazria Metzora year. So convince me that these parshiot have something to teach me, and take me there, take me into that world. So Barry,
This is actually, this is in a sense it's not hard because the you said and we take this as like an article of faith. Every parsha is amazing, and I totally feel like everything in the Torah is meaningful, but sometimes it's a little harder to get at, right? And some things, the stories, certain stories, slavery and freedom, revelation, obviously ethical material, is right out there for you. And this one, you'll forgive me, is it's not skin deep, it's you have to go well beneath the surface. But there's so much that you could say, and some of these things will be homiletical. You can talk about bodies, the embodied character of the human being, and this is not a religion, as certain other religions are, about a body spirit duality, spirit good, body bad. This is a religion that's actually deeply embodied, and what happens to our bodies and the ways that they seem to be healthy or unhealthy or ordered or disordered. That's really important. And in America, by the way, if I were an American, which I am, is anything more like, is there any theme more relevant across American history than the problems of how you look at other people's skin? Okay, skin is the dividing factor among American cultures and people's appearance, and you could have a lot to do with skin, and in because there's a pun that at the beginning of the Torah, after Adam and Eve sinned, God makes them kutnot or with an ayin, and the midrashic and Kabbalistic tradition says that they used to have kutnot or with an aleph. They had bodies of light, and they became bodies of skin, and we have the light still within us, hidden by the skin. And you could go to a whole week's worth of beautiful homilies about skin and sex and birth and all these things wrapped up
okay.
together.
So you're kindling in me a memory of thinking about this, in which reading biologically the significance of skin. I mean, biologically, skin is, there may be one or two genes that encode the skin. We are 99.9999%, with the same DNA, and skin is so insignificant in terms of the genome, in terms of its marker. And so the fact that we determine, that a whole culture has determined character based on the color of your skin is biologically ridiculous. And I think I'll just make the case, following up on you, which is the Torah does not have a category for race. There are, people who claim, well, that Moshe is, and when he complained, when the Miriam talks about Zipporah, she's talking racially, but we've talked about that. But the Torah itself has no category for race. It understands mishpacha, understands family, but not race. The second thing I want to say about skin is not in terms of its racial component or identity component, but in terms of the boundary between life and death. And so maybe that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about things at the boundary of life and death, which is, here, skin holds us in. And so when you cut your skin and you bleed, or when you have eruptions on your skin that are puffy and not particularly
Gross.
yeah,
I think the technical term is yucky.
Yeah,
yucky,
yucky.
unseemly, right? So if you're in antiquity and you see someone with all sorts of sores and such a scale disease, and you don't want to touch them because that's contagious, you're going to build a whole structure around it. Barry, I want to turn to you.
Yeah, I wanted to go in a slightly different
Give me for 1
direction,
sec. I'm just gonna
but
turn
I think
off my-
Jeremy made the essential point that this parsha is very physical, and we live in a culture where physicality is prized and beauty is prized, and the parsha reminds us that a good part of life is not beautiful, and bad things happen to our bodies, and we have to tend to them. We can't change our bodies. I was struck, Elliot, when you noted the separation between life and death, but skin also is what separates us from everyone else.
Indeed.
Our skin is the boundary of ourself.
Yeah.
And we sometimes forget that, I think, because we focus too much on other people's skin, that we all have the same skin, as it were. And, we're all, I guess, politely middle-aged men, and things are happening to our
That's why we're
bodies.
so popular.
Things are happening
With
to our
other
bodies
middle-aged men.
that are not so kind. And, you look in the mirror sometimes and you wonder, what happened to me? I used to be so nice. And, this is a reality of life that we have to deal with. And as the Torah often does, it ritualizes this. So things happen to us that have to be tended to. And one of the interesting things here is that the person who tends to it is the ritual guy, the priest.
Indeed. Okay, so let's focus for a second and ask, the Kohen has a very significant role here. Is the Kohen a physician, or is the Kohen the practitioner of rites? And to what extent is the Kohen looking at the individual, and to what extent is the Kohen looking at the blotches, the skin, or just trying to make categories here? What is the role of Kohen?
Yeah. I mean, I don't exactly know how to answer that question. The instinct is saying to me that that healing, only in a modern world would we make a strong distinction there between a kind of a scientific practitioner and a spiritual one, or a ritual one. And we, if you needed a kidney transplant, you wouldn't worry about the spiritual state of the transplant surgeon. You would just go to him for his technical skills. But I think that ancient people would have seen those things. Biblical people certainly would have seen those things, and into the Hasidic tradition, which loves, the Hasidic tradition loves to make a basic kind of drash that the Rebbe is a kind of physician of the soul, right? That sees what's wrong with the person, and that the skin blotches or the discharges or something about the person, and they know how to diagnose and change. And we have different kind of shamanistic traditions, and in Hasidut they love, like they go on spiritual, the Rebbe has a spiritual journey up to heaven to get an answer, or there's folk healing and stuff like that. So I don't really think it's an either or in this case.
So I'm just thinking about the experience of praying with someone who is suffering an illness, which we do from time to time when we visit, or that's a different kind of prayer, and there's a different kind of spiritual experience with that. I certainly have deep recollection of when I in the pastoral care department, I did a pastoral seminar at Sloan Kettering. And, when you pray with people who are suffering from terminal cancer, it's a different kind of experience. And what you bring, in the moment there is really immeasurable, and people want to reach beyond. Of course, they want healing. They want healing. But the prayer we used to. It was Rabbi Pesach Krauss, Zichrono Livracha, who said his version of the Mishaberach was, "May God unleash the power, the healing power. May God unleash the healing power." And I've always thought about that. That in some way you don't know that if you're going to be healed, but you turn to a power beyond all of us to unleash the power within us, because the body does have a healing power to it. It's remarkable. And so that experience of healing is the spiritual prayer for healing when someone is in front of you, is a very, very powerful experience.
So the other thing we might pay attention to here is the process that the priest takes to identify and to heal takes a fair amount of time. That this is not something that you can make a snap judgment and decide the fate of the person that you're investigating or treating, whatever verb we want to use here. That there's a sequence of events that has to take place because we're talking about a human being. And we often lose sight of the human being in front of us and focus on one aspect of that person. As we said before, the skin or skin diseases. And we've all had the experience ourselves or with other people when we see people that are misshapen or missing limbs. It's hard for most of us not to stare at those people as if that's all they are. Something that is identifiably wrong with them. And I think part of the ritual here is to remind us that life happens to real people in all of its glory, and sometimes it's not glorious moments, and we have to respond to the complete person.
I think that's so on point, and a very important part of discussing this parasha, because everything you said is most true, and I think everybody, the three of us know, and I think all of our listeners experience that about seeing physical deformities, and we have some sense of the instinctive recoiling that people sometimes have around mental illness. It's a new book out by my congregant friend, and he's part of a rabbinic family, Jonathan Rosen, Michal Springer's husband, about mental illness, and a friend of his who with schizophrenia killed somebody, and the revulsion that people have when they come close to mental illness. The other day in New York, I saw somebody with unbelievably grievous, had some sort of unbelievably grievous head injury, and it's like had a huge misshapen head and a wound. It felt like revulsion. It was you couldn't take your eyes away. You couldn't look and you couldn't look away. And all this is true. And in the course of this parasha, why it's so important to discuss is that there's an anathematization of kol tzarua v'kol zav, like people who have leprosy or no way to nice say, oozing sores, are to be sent outside the camp, and at probably some level of instinctive epidemiology that they, the people who might infect others, they have to go away. And so it makes you think about the way in which societies can anathematize the sufferer and isolate the sufferer. And we all know, in our own memory of like the AIDS epidemic or the recent COVID things, like we got to get away from you people, got to get away, and that's quite unhealthy for the sufferer. And so I just want to note that the rabbis, I think they read the same Torah, and they don't have the same kind of methods of self-consciousness of like criticizing something or they can't say, well, we disagree with that. They have to just they use their resources to sweeten the blow sometimes, right? So when it says that this is chapter 13, verse 45, "Vatsaru asher bo hanega," the person who has the leprosy affliction, "Begadav yufrumim," his clothes shall be torn, "V'rosho yeparu," his hair made wild, "V'al safam yeteh," he's got to wear a mask, "V'tameh tameh yikra," and he goes out and calls, "Unclean, unclean." And it certainly seems like stigmatizing. It certainly seems like, making it just as bad as it possibly can be for that person. But in the Talmud, it says that he calls out tameh tameh, so that everybody will know that he is suffering and will pray on his behalf. Melamed shetzarich lehodia tsa'aro l'rabim, v'rabim mevakshim alav rachamim. That the sufferer should tell other people of their pain, and other people will pray for them, which to me is the sages saying, we got to find a way to touch an emotional kindness and not just anathematize the people who are having the hardest possible time.
Where that's in what?
Moed Katan, 15a.
I'm going to use that. I used Barry. I used your vort last week in my Yizkor sermon. I got a lot of tread on that. I got a lot of mileage out of. I love it. It was say the bracha Dayana Met for future acceptance. And this is a great one. Tameh tameh yivakesh rachamim. Okay. Well, you get lots of.
And I just want to add one thing, because what's often lost in the shuffle here is we're so conscious of the priest treating the person who is afflicted that we lose sight of the fact that the treatment is to bring the person back into the community. The person has to leave temporarily, but the idea is that at some point, the person will be able to rejoin the community. And it's important for us to recognize that, because a lot of times we're busy excluding people that we don't think fit for one reason or another, and we don't look for ways to bring them back.
Is this an idealized?
You don't have to look on page 15a, by the way. You got to look on page 5a. I'm sorry.
5a. Okay, well, you got them 5a.
Yeah.
I just want to say are we romanticizing rabbinic culture in pulling these quotes? Because I'm guessing that they could be cruel like everybody else.
Yeah, I mean,
they could be. I don't think we're romanticizing. I think, there's this expression that we're looking for a usable past.
Okay.
And the rabbis are the first people in our people that are reading the Torah in a certain way. And the question for us is, do we read it like the rabbis, meaning follow what they say, or do we read it like the rabbis and interpret the Bible in our own categories for our own day? And both are valid.
Both are valid. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the clock, and we're halfway through, and maybe this would be a good point to segue into the Yamim, the very important days that we are in right now. Having just commemorated Yom HaShoah, we are now in what we call the Aseret Yemei Hodah, the 10 days of gratitude, culminating next week, Tuesday with Yom HaZikaron, and then Wednesday Yom HaAtzmaut, 75 years for the state of Israel. Very important milestone. And of course, we've been touching on the issues in Israel for the last several weeks. And of course, it's been 15 weeks of demonstrations. Even during Passover, there were demonstrations. So Israel is very much a part of our lives and a part of our identities in so many ways. And I know for many of the people that are watching us and listening to us, it is too. I mean, they wouldn't be connected to something like, our Parsha talk and something like Camp Ramah without a kind of deep commitment to Israel and a deep sense of their own Jewish identity connected to the state of Israel. So I want to make this conversation around something that we were talking about, which is Megillat HaAtzmaut, which is so much in the news now. You may have seen pictures or videos of the demonstration, which they take a huge, large Megillat HaAtzmaut, and they're parading down in Tel Aviv on near the Ayalon with the Megillat, the Scroll of Independence. And to the best of my research here, only since 2021 has there been a kind of ceremony at the Kotel, at the egalitarian part of the Kotel, where they've done a public reading of Megillat Ha'atzmaut as part of the days of Yom Ha'atzmaut. And we were looking at that, and this scroll has a set of trope to it, and to chant the scroll of independence with a trope is mitzamrer. It's very moving. It's very moving to hear that. So the question really is, what trope should we use? Is it a Megillah in the sense of like the same trope for the 5 Megillot? Or is it like a Haftarah? And I mention this because we're having a community commemoration here in our central New Jersey, and I'm going to be doing this as part of the commemoration. I'm going to take a piece of the Megillat Ha'atzmaut and chant it. And I'm debating myself whether or not to chant it as Haftarah or chant it as Megillah. So I'm going to turn to my learned colleagues for this question, or maybe just your own reflections on these and other things related to 75 years. And if you want to start, chip in here, pitch in. Go ahead, Barry.
So I think that what struck me listening to you, Elliot, is that the need to read the declaration, I think, is connected with the age of the state. 75 years is more than a lifetime in our tradition. In our tradition, going by the words of the psalmist, 70 years is a measure of a person's life, 80 if they have strength. But we have 75 years, so there are far fewer people who are alive who could tell the story of Israel's independence. The eyewitnesses are almost all gone. And we no longer have the first-person accounts, and so now we have to go to a text. Because when the oral tradition ceases to be rooted in living memory, we turn to a text, and the text speaks to us for those people that can no longer speak to us. And so I think it's very important to have this kind of a ceremony become part of Yom Ha'atzmaut. The other thing I would say is that the text is a very idealized text. It's the great story of the founding of Israel, and that should speak to us quite powerfully, just like I think as Americans, when we hear the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, 250 years or so later, it's still quite moving. It should move us to be better Americans, better Jews.
I want to say this is going to have a liturgical role. And I want to elevate the text of the Scroll of Independence as a quasi-biblical text that has quasi-liturgical status, as if you were going to say it with a bracha. It occurred to me, as I was thinking about this, I said, should I get up in front of the people that are going to be at the commemoration and actually say a bracha, asher kichanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu likro Megillah? Even to recite that, even to say it, it's very emotional, because I say, I am according this text a kind of canonical status that makes it a mitzvah to read this in a liturgical setting. So I'm not there yet, okay?
So I'm actually, in the course of this conversation, I'm not sure I believe that. I'm not sure I believe this down the road, but for the purpose of our conversation, I'll say it now. I can venerate, and I really do love the Megillah, and you and I have talked about, we talk about this wonderful book that Bina, an organization I'm affiliated with in Tel Aviv, has produced called Talmud Israeli, the Israeli Talmud. There you have it, and it's treating it like a sacred text, and it's like Gemara, and it's got commentary, and I think that's exactly right. They also love to do a kind of a quasi-liturgical reading, but that makes it, that makes it Torah she'ba'al peh and not Torah she'bichtav. That makes it oral Torah and not written Torah. And the synagogue is a place of written Torah, and the study house is a place of oral Torah. And the reason that I'm inclined to this is it gets to me some of the spiritual significance of Zionism and the creation of the state of Israel, which I do think has religious significance, but I'm also like increasingly uncomfortable, especially right now, with the problem of according a sacred status to the state, because the state is like any state, and it can be monumentally screwed up, and it can be corrupt, and politicians are politicians, wherever they live, and they can always be counted on to take bribes and to self-aggrandize and to blow at the wind whenever it suits them. And all those things are true of politicians in Israel as in America. And there is something to be said for, when looking at, for example, the Gush Emunim crowd and the messianic, religious Zionist settlers, who I think have vastly over-identified religion with the political Zionism in the state of Israel, and comparing that to the Haredim, who said, the ultra-Orthodox, who said, like, not so fast, religion is religion, and politics is politics. I want to, like, maybe carry some brief for the moment for the Haredim to say, let's slow down a little bit before we identify Jewish religion with the state Medinat Yisrael. And so I started off this conversation thinking, like, yeah, liturgical reading in synagogue, and now I'm thinking, well,
Maybe
maybe
not.
that's not exactly right.
Okay, so, Barry. I mean, so
Yeah, so what I would emphasize is what is the really important aspect of the modern state of Israel? And I think it's the Yishuv, the settlement of the land of Israel. That what we prize, I think, overall, is not necessarily the government, as you said, with all of its foibles, but the fact that Jews in large numbers have now settled in the land, and Jews in also large numbers come to visit that land, that it has become a center of Jewish life. And we're living in a moment where the state of Israel's Jewish population is eclipsing the United States' Jewish population, so that Israel will truly be the place that I think Isaiah envisioned when he said, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, that the Torah will go forth from Israel, because it is the largest Jewish community in the world. And that, I think, also has religious significance. And I think that, sometimes we get bogged down with the details that bother us rather than focus on the things that are transcendent.
So, it's interesting, and I want to go back to what you said, Barry, earlier, because it's not an accident, a coincidence that these rituals are emerging, in this time frame, and maybe if we could be a little bit historical, at what point does Torah reading become a liturgical act in ancient history? Well, I would go to Ezra standing at the water tower and reading and interpreting, right? That amazing moment where Ezra is standing and reading the Torah, and there are people that are there that are basically translating it and interpreting it as he's reading it. And that already is after the exiles come back from Babylonia. They are resettling in the land, and they need a founding document, and that's what he's doing. And so maybe what you're saying is we are subconsciously attentive to the passing of living memory to an oral memory into text. And so the reading of text then ought to inspire, the kind of discussion that is, codified in a book like this, and and reaching its expression on the streets now as people, dramatize the Declaration of Independence in large parades, basically. And I'm looking for something emotional, and I'm looking for something liturgical, because simply to recite the Hallel, simply that may not be enough. And of course, most people don't come to synagogue, don't come to minyan, but they will come to an event, a communal commemoration for Israel, especially if there's food, with it. And maybe that, and the opposite of this is, so we just commemorated the Holocaust, where there is, I mean, can you think of one?
Also a Megillah associated.
There's no canonical text. You can't. I mean, it's impossible. It would be impossible to agree on a canonical text for the Holocaust because there is none. It's beyond canonization in my I mean, we have libraries. We have Masechtot. I always say, you have Masechet Vilna Ghetto, Masechet Warsaw Ghetto, Masechet.
Well, what you would end up with, I think, is something in the short form, like the book of Lamentations, which is 5, and the book of Psalms, which is 150 chapters, drawn from a large time period of all sorts of expressions, that could somehow make itself into a fitting textual memory of the Holocaust.
A few years ago, JPS published something, Abba Kovner, Megillah, Scrolls of Testimony.
Mhm.
But it's unwieldy. It's a huge. It wouldn't make. And of course, Jeremy, you remember David Roski's published lots and lots of years ago, Nechtewerter, night words,
Yeah.
a liturgy for the Holocaust. So I don't know, but so we're looking for something. So back to my question. Megillah, trop, or
so I would recommend that you use more than one trop.
Okay,
that's
a good compromise.
I think there is a prophetic aspect to the Megillat Ha'atzmaut, which would go with Haftarah trop. And as we were talking before the show, Jeremy, pointed out that the Ketuvim, we understand even if they're written B'Ruach HaKodesh with Holy Spirit, they're fundamentally human texts. So that the text of Megillat Ha'atzmaut is a human text, but we wanted to use it to approach the divine, so we use the trope from the Megillot.
So the question then musically is, and it's nothing that we can really understand, is what has much more musical pathos.
I actually like the Megillah trope better for this. When you
like
your sample. Right, so we have a difference of opinion. We have different musical taste on some things.
The Haftarah trope, when I started reciting it just to practice it, just to think about it, it brought tears to my eyes. It was that emotional. It was that I read the Haftarah for last day of Pesach, and it's an emotional time. It's before Yizkor, and I found myself choking up reading it because it's such an emotional thing. And of course, I have a chazaka in my shul to read the Torah for Shmini Atzeret because, as you know, that was my senior sermon. So, and it's emotional. I get emotional because the melody is emotional. Can't help it. I don't know.
But so as long as we're talking about this, here we are recording this on Wednesday, the 13th day of the Omer, as we march our way towards
Shavuot.
But Yonatan Geffen died today or yesterday.
Yeah, he died. Yeah.
And Yonatan Geffen, I mean, this is just so crazy, mind blowing. David Broza, the first song David Broza ever wrote, he wrote the music to Yehiyeh Tov, but it was the first song he wrote. Like, what is it? What is that? It's like your first song is an utter classic. How could that be? It's like just downhill from there. But Yonatan Geffen wrote the words.
He wrote the words to Yeto. Oh my goodness! Oh.
So you imagine these young guys in the 1970s. Geffen was only 76 years old or whatever. So he was in the 70s. He was in his early 20s. You imagine these two guys in their early 20s, and it's like Lennon and McCartney, for crying out loud. They just first time out of the blocks, they write a great classic. So
Yeto was written in 78, I think, or 77.
Something like that. Because it's got to be after Sadat, because it refers to Sadat.
Okay, so I was in Israel on the one-year program.
That was 81.
81, 82. And David Broza came to perform at Mount Scopus, and he performed Yeh Tov, and the place went wild. It wasn't the first time that he performed it.
Because I have a recording of it from like 1977 at New
Okay, so it was already around.
Yeah.
Wow. So we have Shtei Ktuvim HaMachashishim, two positions. Well, not Ktuvim, two positions. Megillah Trop, Haftarah Trop, and Barry, you're saying do them both, which is great. It's a great rabbinic conversation.
And so I'll go back for the Beit HaMidrash, and it should be like the Gemara tune. In the land of Israel was founded, and they gave the world the book of books.
But then you would have to translate it into Yiddish.
Very good, very good. Okay. No, I think I'm going to do Haftarah because I want the emotion.
So what's interesting, Elliot, is what you're saying is that the emotion comes from your associations.
Exactly.
And that also is an important part, because a holiday like Yom HaAtzmaut is almost all associational. It's what we bring from all parts of our life that make it the special day that it is. Absolutely. So I want to point out, because I don't have the opportunity to do this too much, 50 years ago, I was in Jerusalem for the 25th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel. And the day before, I walked in and out of every gate except for one of the old city. And the one I didn't, of course, is the one that's closed. Nebuch the Messiah still has not come to open it. And I, think back at how, not only how young I was, but how young and innocent the state was. I was there just before the Yom Kippur War. And now, 50 years later, Israel is an adult. It's not a kid anymore. And we look for different things in adults than we do in kids. And our sense of the problems and also of the hopes are different as well. And I think that, one of the things that, as we've been talking about, we're looking for ways as religious Jews to find expression to those deeply rooted aspects of our soul, which responds to a modern state of Israel.
So beautifully said. And with that, I think we gotta come to our conclusion. Tam Hazman Shelanu on the pre-Yom HaAtzmaut broadcast. As always, want to thank people watching and listening to us. We are so honored that you spend some time with us. We really, really mean it. It's beyond touching to us. So we really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you again. In the meantime, I want to say Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, Atzmaut Sameach, and see you all next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Bye-bye.